Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily short story. Now, before I start today's story, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this short story and any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers and at your local bookstore and local library if you requested, and you can order paperback copies from Amazon. Now, here's today's short story. I hope you enjoyed just as much as I did writing it.
Christmas theft. Walking along the small brown corridor of the university accommodation, Betty tried to ignore the horrible brown carpet and the smooth bright yellow walls, but that was hard. Too hard. Even when she went to this same university, here in Canterbury, England a few decades ago, she never could appreciate the university's design choice. As she passed more and more wooden doors with their little hotel keypads on the outside, Betty breathed in the typical smell of university. Weed, and lots of it. She could even see smoke coming out from one of the doors, and Betty coughed as she passed it. She knew it was normal at university to smoke weed. She never did, but she knew basically everyone else did. Yet surely these university students should have more sense to smoke outside and not in their rooms. Shaking the thoughts away, Betty kept walking along the corridor, listening to the talking, laughing and even singing in the rooms as she went. That was something she missed about university, the community. Sure, Betty didn't like the partying aspects of it, but she had made some great friends, and she supposed it was a lot easier to make friends back then compared to now. Betty looked ahead, as she saw lots of wooden doors with dirty glass in the middle coming up ahead. She still had no idea why the university needed to separate the corridor into mini-sections, but that was life. Opening one of the cold wooden doors, Betty thought about why she was here again after all these years. Being a private eye was a great job, she loved it, and she loved being available to unofficially break rules time to time. A wave of unease washed over Betty as she remembered the panicked text message from her nephew. The text was chaotic and aggressive. He was clearly annoyed, but he wasn't responding to any of Betty's texts. So after she had calmed down and realized that the text didn't mean he was in danger, she actually read it. Her nephew Sean wanted her to come and see him immediately. Betty still felt uneasy about all this, yet something she couldn't understand was why he wanted to hire her. Sure, it was one thing to ask for your aunt to come to your aid. Betty would have loved this. But Sean insisted on hiring her. Betty just didn't know why. Breathing in another awful breath of weed smoke, she was starting to regret her choice, and maybe thought she should have arranged to meet him outside. Betty shook her head at that idea. She wouldn't do that. She loved her nephew, and she had a feeling there was something he didn't want her sister to know about. Just the thought of that made Betty's stomach tighten into a knot. She hated the idea of her nephew being in trouble. But the idea of Betty being the only one who could save him did have a certain ring to it, and it might allow her to get out of her sister's present this year. Opening another cold wooden door, Betty smiled as she walked into the last section of the corridor and smelt the delicious hints of ginger, allspices and cinnamon in the air. They smelt amazing. At least that made Betty relax a bit more. She knew her nephew wasn't smoking weed. As she heard the buzz of a room opening, she looked straight ahead, smiling as she saw her nephew's little head pop out. Betty couldn't believe how well he looked, with his smooth young face and longish brown hair parted to the right. Sean rushed over and hugged his aunt. Betty returned the massive hug. She couldn't remember how long it had been. As Sean led her into his room, Betty's eyebrows rose as she realized he hadn't said a word to her. But what was more shocking was how Sean was wearing designer jeans. Betty had no idea why. Sean was the least fashion-conscious person in the world, but he looked good. Stepping into Sean's room, Betty had to admit it was a lot nicer than she was expecting. She remembered her room was a tiny box room, covered in dirty clothes with textbooks littered around. Sean's was nothing like that, with his small rectangular room with sterile white walls and neatly arranged desk with his laptop, and a pile of neatly folded clothes. Then Betty looked at his perfectly clean ensuite, and she had a quick look in this rarer empty brown wardrobe. A part of her started to question why her nephew wasn't asking her to stop. She checked places out on instinct. It was a terrible habit, as her mum kept reminding her. But Sean was sitting there on his small blue bed that was tucked into one corner, his foot tapping rapidly. Betty smiled and gently sat down next to him, feeling the soft sheets take her weight. "You want to talk about it?" Betty asked, trying to make sure she didn't sound like an interrogator. Sean looked at her. "Auntie, I've got something to tell you." Betty wanted to say something along the lines of, she guessed that by the text. It was better than "no shit Sherlock," which was her usual saying, and never failed to make Sean laugh. But she behaved herself because she had a feeling Sean wouldn't laugh at it this time. "Okay," Betty said. "And you can't tell Mum, please?" Betty forced a smile and nodded. "I lost a present. I have a boyfriend. Someone robbed me. They threatened me and—" Betty placed a finger on her nephew's lips and hugged him. She and her sister had had a bet for years about when Sean was going to come out, and to who. Betty smiled as she could feel the plane tickets to Antigua in her hands now, and at least she didn't have to pay for her sister to go to Australia. After a few moments, Sean pulled away. You aren't mad?" Betty's eyes widened as she tried to understand what he was talking about, then she realized. Trying to be the supportive aunt, Betty grabbed Sean's hands. "Sean, me and ya mum, we know you're gay. It's fine. We're both happy about it. And I have to say thank you, because you just won me a bet." Sean cocked his head and smiled, as he knew exactly what his mother and aunt were like. "Why would we be mad?" Betty asked, already knowing the answer. "You know what Dad's like. He'll hate me." Betty went to open her mouth, but she closed it. There was nothing she could say, only support and love him. "Me and ya mum will protect you." Sean hugged her again. "Now tell me what happened about this robbery," Betty asked. Sean frowned. "I bought this wonderful present for Harry for Christmas. This special Christmas tree necklace, he'd love it." As Sean kept talking over the minor details, Betty smiled as she realized she had never seen her nephew so happy and smiley about anyone in his life. He was full of life and honestly happy, something she hadn't seen in a long time. She couldn't even remember the last time she was full of life. "Then I told some friends about it. I promise I kept it hidden. I know what people are like. I came back from a lecture. Someone was in here and grabbed the present. They threatened me and Harry if I told anyone." Betty's eyes narrowed and her voice turned deadly cold. "Someone robbed you and threatened you when you walked in on them?" Sean nodded. "Who was it?" Sean stood up and paced around a little bit. "My friend Danielle next door. She was wearing a mask, but I recognized the voice." Betty stood out frowning. How dare this criminal target her nephew? Why the hell would she do it? There was no reason for it. Betty tried not to scream in rage, but she couldn't let someone threaten her family. With her eyes narrowing, Betty asked, "What does that girl look like?" Sean closed his eyes. He clearly hadn't seen Danielle in a little while. "She has blonde hair, nose piercing, round face, white and—" "Auntie, she has a horrible burn mark on her right hand." Betty nodded. She could work with that. A part of her couldn't believe that rather vague description was better than the normal ones she got. Maybe her nephew was better at this crime thing than she thought. But there was one question still bothering her. "And why hire me?" "I wanted to hire you because I know Mum's always talking about how tight money is for you. I wanted to help." As soon as she heard that, Betty gave him a massive hug. Her sister definitely wasn't perfect, but she did know how to raise great children. "You really are such a kind boy. Make you a deal, give me 20 and we'll call it square," Betty said. Sean smiled and got out his wallet, giving Betty the money. As she walked out the small room, Betty said, "I'll call you when it's done." She realized how bad that must have sounded, but no one ever threatens her family, no matter who they are. Walking back into the awful corridor with its horrible brown carpet and bright yellow walls, Betty turned to the wooden door next to Sean's room. The smell of delicious Christmas spices filled the air, and the warm heat coming from an overhead vent in the ceiling made Betty smile a little. As she looked at the small keypad in the front, Betty tried to decide what to do next. She wouldn't do her normal private eye stuff that involved unofficially smashing down doors. She didn't want Sean to see her doing that, nor did Betty want the university to blame Sean for the damage. So she decided to do what she always did in times like this. Betty knocked on the door 3 times, surprising at the warm feeling of the door against her hand. No answer. She knocked again. "Danielle, housekeeping," Betty said. Still nothing. Placing her ear against the warm wooden door, Betty tried to listen out for any sign of her inside, but there weren't any sounds. Betty took a step back and slipped out a small black device she always carried, a little gift from a black market friend a few years ago. It made electronic keypads a breeze to crack. She was about to press it against the pad, when she heard another buzz of a door opening. Turning around, Betty put the device back in her pocket, as she saw a tall, slightly overweight girl walk out of the kitchen covered in flour. Betty walked up to her. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Danielle. The library sent me to get her to return a book." The girl rolled her eyes. "That sound like her. Always useless, ain't she? She still owes me a score for last Saturday." Betty was starting to get a much better picture of this Danielle girl. She didn't like her. Not one bit. "Do you know where I might find her, please?" "The librarian won't be happy without that book," Betty said. "I know that librarian, Simone." "Sorry girl, Danielle left for the station half an hour ago." "Thank you. Merry Christmas," Betty said. Betty stormed over. She wasn't going to let this Danielle person escape with that present. She had no right to do that, and no right to steal from her family. Betty knew some things never changed in university towns, and thankfully the train station was one of them. As she walked into Canterbury East train station, Betty smiled as the memories of her getting the train home returned to her. Her eyes narrowed on the wide grey platforms with the dirty white pillars that supported an old tiled roof shelter that was over the platforms. It might not have sounded much, but Betty remembered more than enough times of when the shelter provided welcome relief from the rain. Betty listened to the talking of parents, students and everyone else, as her eyes narrowed on the shop that smelt of rich bitter coffee on the other side of the platform. There weren't any trains yet, but Betty wasn't taking any chances. As Sean reminded her as they raced down here in her car, Danielle could have grabbed a bus half an hour ago and be on a train already. Yet there was something about Christmas time that made her doubt that a girl like Danielle wouldn't be scared or think any retribution would come for her. She wasn't going to make a quick getaway. She was going to walk down, take her time and enjoy the Christmas markets. Looking around, Betty couldn't see Sean, which didn't concern her that much as she had sent him to look in the little subway tunnel that connected the 2 train platforms, but she would be amazed if Danielle were that easy to find. The heat of strangers pressed against Betty as the train station got busier and busier with all the students hoping to grab a train home. Most of the international students were heading to London for the Eurostar. Betty so badly wanted to join them and see the continent. She loved Christmas in Paris a few years ago. But she had to focus. Taking another rich coffee-scented breath of the air, Betty saw a small blonde-haired girl with a horrible nose piercing a few meters away. There was something familiar about her. Betty closed her eyes as she tried to remember what Sean had said about her. Betty opened her eyes when she remembered the detail about the burn mark on her right hand. She knew she had to get closer. So gently gliding through the crowd, gently pushing past students deafening themselves with bad music. She kept her eyes focused on Danielle. When Betty got closer, she noticed Danielle was playing music as she touched her earpods with her right hand. Betty smiled as she saw the blistered skin and bright red burn marks. Betty supposed she would normally feel bad for Danielle. She must have been in a terrible accident, but in this moment she didn't care. This Danielle girl had threatened her her nephew no less. Placing a hand on Danielle's cold shoulder, Betty stood next to her. Danielle took out her earpods and frowned at her. "What ya problem, woman?" Danielle said. Betty frowned. "You have something that belongs to my nephew." Danielle laughed and looked away. Betty stuck her finger in Danielle's side. "Don't move. I want the item back now or I'm not afraid to." "Well, you can guess," Betty said. She never ever liked using these sorts of tactics, but she would do anything for her family. Danielle snorted and shook her head. "That just a finger." "Fuck off," she said. Betty couldn't believe how disrespectful she was being. "Give me back the item and I will leave. I won't report you to the police." "Bitch, I got friends in police. My mother's an officer. So go fuck yourself." Betty shook her head. "What's your problem with my nephew? Maybe I can help you." Danielle turned to face Betty. "That little boy. He ain't a man. He's a gay. I wanted him, asked him out, no guy rejects me, so yay when he confessed he was a gay. I got pissed." "No one rejects this," Danielle said, pointing to her body. Betty tried not to laugh, but this was ridiculous. So Betty tried her ultimate card. "You might think you're safe, but you aren't. I can do a quick search on the deep web. Learn all your secrets, learn your passwords, credit card numbers. I can own your identity, I can own you." Danielle's eyes widened. "You won't. My mum's a cop, bitch, she'll..." Betty smiled. "I wonder how many crimes has she fixed for you? I wonder how will you do, without an officer for a mother? I could find all her secrets, get her fired. I've done it before." Betty wasn't lying, she never enjoyed it, but she hated dirty cops. Thankfully they were always rare. Danielle frowned as she took off her black backpack, opened it up, and gave Betty a small wrapped-up present in the shape of a thin jewelry box. The sound of the train pulling in almost deafened Betty, as Danielle started to walk away. Betty grabbed her arm. "If you bother my nephew again, all my promises will come reality." "Fine. Now fuck off," Danielle said, walking away. Betty frowned as she watched that horrible girl walk onto the train and disappear. She really didn't like making threats, but after decades as a private eye, Betty sadly knew it was a needed part of the job. Yet she was still telling the truth. If Danielle did come after Sean again, there would be hell to pay. Stepping outside the train station, Betty took a deep breath of the fresh Canterbury air with hints of delicious Christmas spices from the markets nearby. She missed the delicious Christmas markets. She missed a lot of things about Canterbury. Looking around, Betty watched the odd taxi drive past as students ran into the station, and other students smoked normal cigarettes, thankfully, as they leant against the dirty brick walls of the station. As she looked dead ahead, Betty focused on the amazing view for a moment. It wasn't much compared to other parts of Canterbury, but for a train station it was amazing. Her eyes narrowed on the remains of the Roman walls that littered the horizon, as it mixed with the urban shops and more white modern buildings. Then in the distance, she could only just make out the spire of the cathedral, that amazing cathedral she loved exploring. Betty just stood there for a moment, holding the perfectly wrapped gift in her hands. Betty knew she said she would call Sean when it was done, but she just wanted to enjoy those strange moments of peace between the completing of the job and reporting to the client. The sound of talking and goodbyes behind her reminded Betty of all the people she had left behind since her university days. Sure, she missed them. She really missed her international friends, but she was a completely different woman now. It still didn't make her loneliness feel any easier. "Auntie!" Sean shouted behind her. As soon as she heard Sean, Betty realized she was never ever alone. She had a family, a nephew, and everything she really needed. Of course her sister drove her mad at times, but that's the magical thing about family. Focusing on Sean with his designer jeans and massive smile, Betty cocked her head as she realized there was someone attached to his arm. It had to be Harry. Betty's mouth dropped as she focused on Harry. She couldn't believe how attractive he was. He was honestly like a movie star with his strong jawline and perfect smile. And she knew it sounded awful, but she couldn't exactly understand how Sean landed a guy like that. Even Betty couldn't back in the day, and she had had tons of comments about her looks. "Thank you," Sean said as Betty passed him in the gift. Betty stared at both the boys, as she was waiting for some sort of official introduction. "Sean, aren't you going to introduce us?" Harry said, his voice deep with a slight accent. "Oh yeah, sure. Aunt Betty, this is Harry and..." Sean said before he looked away. Betty knew exactly why he didn't look at her. She had been wondering how long until Sean finally realized it was the Christmas season, and he would have to come home. Well, Betty wanted him to come home, and so did her sister. "Harry, going home for Christmas?" Betty asked. Sean looked at her, a puzzled expression on his face. "No, miss. I'm afraid me and my parents can't afford it." Harry said. Betty knew he had worked it out, and both the boys smiled at each other as they realized what Betty was doing. "Come on, boys. We'll go back to the uni, grab your stuff, and you can stay with us for the holidays. Grandma won't mind." "Thank you," both the boys said as they hugged each other and walked off to Betty's car. As Betty watched the boys both happy and deeply in love, she couldn't help but smile. That's all she had ever wanted for Sean and her family, to be happy, safe, and loving life. And watching those boys deeply in love, that was all Betty needed to see. She had done her job today, and that made her feel damn proud. Betty had helped her nephew, she got paid, and she was even a helper in the romance department. Sure, her brother-in-law wouldn't be happy, but Betty never liked him anyway. She could and would handle him like Danielle if the need arose. Because like as Betty always said, she would protect her family to the end and do everything to protect them. But at this magical time of year, Betty knew love would prevail. She would make sure of it. And she would hope the new year brought some of her love, along with lots and lots of business. But until then, it was a magical time of year. A time for gifting, thieving, and sharing, but most importantly, family.
Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteleyverse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.